What if the Halloween revenge you planned so meticulously turned into a discovery so dark it ruined your life forever, transforming a simple prank into an encounter with absolute evil that haunts you to the grave? Picture that, listeners, because tonight, in this eerie hour where shadows stretch long and the whispers of the wind seem to carry the sins of the past, we're diving into a true story from the cobbled streets of Leeds, United Kingdom, back in 1998, when a group of teenagers, driven by anger and the tradition of mischief night, stumbled upon something no child should ever see. Listen closely, because this isn't a fable spun to scare little ones. It's a raw confession from a man who, even now over 2 decades later, can't close his eyes without seeing that framed photograph and that lock of hair in a glass jar screaming horrible truths. But before we plunge into the darkness, let me hit you with this question that is clawing at your mind. Are you ready to question whether human justice is enough when the devil walks among us disguised as a school teacher? If this story sends shivers down your spine and makes you doubt your neighbor's smiles, prove you're committed to uncovering the truth behind these chilling tales. Or it'll make it clear you'd rather support the silence in this war against the hidden. How many of us will dare to seek the truth this Halloween? Stick with me, because the abyss is staring right back. It all started in the grey, rainy autumn of 1998, when I was just 14 and Leeds was draped in fallen leaves, as if the city itself knew something sinister was brewing. Let's say I was an ordinary kid. I loved football, devoured my mom's shepherd's pie on Sundays, and spent afternoons in the park throwing sticks for our old Labrador, who chased them like each toss was his last adventure. School, though, was my personal nemesis, a place where hours stretched like chewing gum and teachers felt like wardens of a bureaucratic hell. But I had Danny, my best mate, a kindred spirit who turned dull hallways into circuits of laughter and wild schemes. We'd catch the bus together after school, and no matter how rough my day had been, a failed exam, an unfair scolding, or just the weight of teenage angst, Danny always found a way to lift my spirits, cracking jokes about teachers or spinning conspiracy theories about why the cafeteria food tasted like soggy cardboard. We were inseparable, like two shadows in a storm, until one day, fate decided it was time to flip the script. Danny was the one who needed cheering up, and I became the helpless witness to an injustice that sparked a chain of events dragging us all to the edge of the abyss. Danny was the kind of lad adults envied, never late for class, homework always on time, and he stayed out of trouble like he had a built-in radar for chaos. He was the model student, the one teachers used to shame the rest of us. But fate, fickle as ever, stepped in during a mundane moment that turned into a nightmare. One morning, rushing out of the boys' toilets, Danny accidentally bumped into Mr. Carter, a math teacher known for his volcanic temper and love for scalding hot tea. The collision was minor, but the fallout catastrophic. Carter's mug tipped, splashing boiling tea across his pristine white shirt, leaving red stains like fresh blood. Danny apologized profusely, stammering excuses as steam rose in accusing spirals. But Carter wasn't in a forgiving mood. His face twisted into a mask of pure rage, screaming that it was deliberate, a student's sabotage. Instead of a simple detention, Danny was sent straight to referral, a purgatory worse than any punishment, where sins were logged in eternal files. Carter didn't stop there. He escalated the complaint to the head teacher, claiming it was a serious health and safety issue, that the tea could have caused permanent burns or even a civil lawsuit. The head teacher, pressured by 1998 UK Department of Education zero-tolerance policies on implied violence, considered immediate expulsion. Picture the scene. Danny, brown eyes brimming with unshed tears, sat in a hard chair while his parents, his dad a mechanic, his mom a nurse, honest working-class folk, begged for mercy in a hallway reeking of disinfectant and despair. Danny's parents fought tooth and nail, recounting tales of his innate kindness, how he helped neighbors with groceries or dreamed of being a vet to save stray animals. In the end, after tense hours, they negotiated the punishment down to 2 weeks of after-school detention, 1 hour daily Monday to Friday, plus 2 hours every Saturday morning. The head teacher agreed to believe it wasn't intentional, citing Danny's spotless record, but warned that any repeat offense would be the end. Exhausted but relieved, his parents told him to keep his mouth shut, take the punishment as a bitter lesson in adult world injustice, and move on like a scar that no longer bleeds. "Life's not fair, son," his dad said that night in their kitchen, rain tapping the window like impatient fingers. "But you're better than this. Nod, take it, and keep going." Danny nodded, but a new fire burned in his eyes, a spark of resentment I noticed, but couldn't read. He and I spent those first detentions joking about the absurdity of the school system, laughing about how Carter probably burned his own tongue on that tea before the crash, but beneath the banter, Danny simmered. Enter Paul, Danny's older brother, 3 years our senior, almost a man in my young eyes, with patchy stubble and a gaze that had seen too much of the cruel world. Paul was everything Danny wasn't, rebellious with a history of minor suspensions and a visceral hatred for authority, especially types like Carter, who'd humiliated him publicly years back, forcing him to read aloud in class while mocking his northern accent. Paul never forgot. When he heard about Danny's incident, his reaction was primal, a roar of outrage that shook the walls of their terraced house. "That bastard won't get away with it," he swore, pacing like a caged lion as Danny and I huddled on their worn sofa, nibbling stale biscuits. Paul promised revenge, but not the impulsive kind that lands you in cuffs. No, he spoke of cold revenge, served like a dish chilled to lethal perfection. "If we go now, all hot-headed with rotten eggs or toilet paper, he'll know it's us," Paul explained, sitting between us with a lukewarm beer, his voice low and conspiratorial like a movie villain. "Wait, act sorry. Let him think you're tamed, then strike when he least expects it. Do it on a night when chaos is normal, when no one bats an eye at mischief." That night was Mischief Night, known in parts of England as the perfect prelude to Halloween, October 30th, when kids flood the streets to egg houses, drape trees in toilet paper, and revel in anarchy adults tolerate as a rite of passage. For those unaware, and I didn't know this myself until I looked it up years later, Mischief Night is a tradition stretching back centuries tied to the eve of religious festivals, when the veil between the living and the dead thins. In olden days, it meant stealing cabbages from farms as playful offerings to spirits. By the late 20th century in the UK and US, it morphed into mild vandalism. Eggs splattering facades, toilet paper rolls dangling from trees like ghostly garlands, giggles muffled in the dark. Once held on April 30th or the night before Bonfire Night in November, by the 90s it settled firmly on October 30th, Halloween's gateway, when carved pumpkins flicker and costumes hide identities. Paul chose that night with surgical precision, knowing anonymity's cloak would drape leads like a black cape. But it wasn't just cover. Paul wanted the revenge to hurt deeply, not a superficial scratch like eggs or paper. "We won't hurt him physically. We're better than that," he clarified, though his tone hinted emotional pain would be a slow poison. Weeks passed in secret planning, whispered meetings in the park after school, maps scribbled in notebooks hidden under mattresses. Paul researched Carter. He knew the man was a classic car nut, had sunk a fortune into a 1961 Jaguar E-Type First Series, valued at tens of thousands of pounds, locked in his garage like a cherished child. That car was his pride, the reason he woke each morning, polishing it endlessly on weekends. "We'll wreck it," Paul said with a wolfish grin. "Take what he loves most, and he won't know who did it until it's too late." The plan took shape in early October, when leaves crunched underfoot like dry bones. But we knew it wouldn't be easy. Breaking into the garage at night would alert Carter or a nosy neighbor, bringing sirens and cuffs before we could savor victory. We debated silent options, slashing the leather seats with sharp knives, spray painting pompous "Git" on the glossy hood, but nothing sated Paul's hunger for profound suffering, something to gnaw at Carter's soul as he'd gnawed at Danny's. Danny, bitter from detentions keeping him locked up until 7 p.m., greenlit any idea with a grim nod. His prior innocence evaporated like morning mist. We got creative, almost poetic in our youthful malice. Phase 1 involved Marvin, Paul's mate, a lanky 16-year-old with a rusty bike and a taste for risk. For nearly 3 weeks, almost nightly, Marvin cycled to Carter's house, a modest, semi-detached in a red brick residential area with a pristine garden and curtains always drawn, banged on the door like an impatient debt collector, then fled pedaling as if the devil chased him. He brought us reports. At first, Carter opened the door frowning, shouting into the void. Then, his anger grew, cursing, "Those ungrateful brats." By the end, he ran down the street after Marvin, face red as a ripe tomato, promising biblical beatings if he caught him. "He's on edge," Marvin whispered in our meetups, eyes gleaming with shared malice. "One more push and he'll snap." Everything went to Paul's plan, precise as a Swiss watch, until the morning of October 30th, when the air buzzed with static and the smell of burning leaves drifted from distant gardens. At school, excitement was palpable. Kids swapped plans in hushed tones, secret parties, trick-or-treat routes, costumes cobbled from sheets and homemade makeup. But Danny and I kept perfect poker faces when asked. "Nothing much, just staying out of trouble." We lied with practiced smiles, my heart pounding like a war drum. We had no classes with Carter, thank God, but I saw him in the corridor once, his tall, lanky frame silhouetted against fluorescent light, and I swear the color drained from my face like water down a sink. Paranoid, I imagined he'd smell my guilt in a shifty glance, sense betrayal in my nervous sweat. The 3:15 bell was divine relief, and I walked to the bus stop with Danny reviewing the plan for the 100th time. I'd arrive at his place at 7 p.m. Paul would have it all orchestrated. Marvin would execute the final distraction. "I'm nervous," I admitted, as the bus rattled down wet streets. Danny nodded, squeezing my hand briefly. "Me too, but thanks for being here. You're the best friend I've ever had." That line, simple and true, obliterated any doubts. There was no turning back when loyalty burned brighter than fear. Hours later, under a leaden sky threatening a storm, the four of us met in a dark corner 2 streets from Carter's house, bikes stashed behind thorny bushes. With Paul and Marvin leading, my nerves melted like dew in sunlight. I felt invincible, eager to unleash our collective rage on that gleaming Jaguar. Marvin slunk forward like a ghost, crept up the driveway lit by a flickering street lamp, and pounded the door hard enough to wake the dead. But this time he didn't flee right away. He waited until Carter opened his silhouette framed in the yellow doorway and shouted, "Catch me if you can toss her," then pedaled like a demon possessed, zigzagging down the street as Carter erupted in primal fury. We saw it ourselves. The man in wrinkled pajamas and mismatched slippers chased after him screaming obscenities to shame a sailor, then doubled back to his driveway, jumped into his everyday car, not the precious Jaguar, but a drab gray sedan, and roared off in pursuit tires, screeching like tortured souls. We were elated. The plan worked perfectly, but the clock was ticking. Marvin said past chases lasted about 15 minutes, with Carter prowling alleys in vain before giving up. We wasted no time. Gloves on, we sprinted to the driveway, my heart hammering like an anvil, and headed for the side garage, a splintered wooden structure smelling of oil and buried secrets. Paul pulled an old towel from his rucksack. Danny held it against the small side window, and with a muffled punch, Paul shattered the glass in a dull burst, like a stifled gasp. He knocked out the remaining shards, draped the towel over the lower frame to avoid cuts, and one by one we climbed inside, landing in dusty darkness with bated breath. I flicked on my phone's torch, a basic Nokia from the era, its light wobbly, and swept the beam across the wide space, expecting to see the Jaguar lurking like a crouched beast. But there was nothing, just an echoing void, a gap where Carter's pride should have been, as if the garage itself had swallowed the car whole. Months of planning, sleepless nights and whispers, reduced to smoke. I suggested we leave, maybe smash a front window on the way out to salvage some pride, and Danny agreed, his voice a tight thread in the gloom. But Paul, eyes burning like embers, refused flat out. "There's got to be something here, something to really hurt him," he growled, rummaging through shelves of rusty tools and dried-up paint cans. "I'd bet my life he keeps his army treasures in there," Paul muttered. And I knew he was right. Carter had served in the forces in the 70s, boasting about medals in school assemblies. Stealing that would be like ripping out his heart. Nearby, on a tool rack, hung rusty bolt cutters, heavy as sledgehammers. Paul took them down with shaking hands, and he and Danny set to work on the padlock, metal squealing in protest as they bit into the bolt. The sound was deafening in the garage's silence, a metallic shriek like a cry for help, but it finally gave with a snap, like a bone breaking. Paul and Danny knelt, flipped open the lid with a groan of hinges, and rifled through the contents eagerly. I leaned over their shoulders, the torchlight revealing an unexpected hoard. Not medals or uniforms, but white envelopes stuffed full, dozens tied with faded ribbons. I thought at first they were cash, a secret stash of pounds, but opening one revealed handwritten letters, ink faded, confessing forbidden loves or forgotten debts. Danny pocketed some scattered jewelry, a cheap pearl necklace, a gaudy gold ring, but then Paul pulled out a dusty photo frame and a small glass jar, sealed with wax, holding a lock of curly brown hair. The photo showed a young woman, about 20, beaming in a floral dress from the 80s, eyes bright under a summer sky. I figured she was a niece or lost girlfriend, since Carter, to public knowledge, was a lifelong bachelor with no family. But Paul stared at the photo for endless seconds, his face paling like paper under the torchlight, and dropped it back like it burned. "Put the jewelry back now," he ordered, his voice a hoarse whisper that brooked no argument. Danny protested. "Why? This is perfect to screw him over." But Paul was already heading for the broken window, ignoring pleas. "No, Danny, we're leaving, now." His tone was steel-forged in pure terror, and we scrambled out like rats fleeing a fire, grabbing the towel and sprinting to the hidden bikes. "Follow me and don't stop till I do," Paul panted, and we pedaled like mad through labyrinthine alleys, lungs burning, legs screaming, until he finally slowed in an empty park, where we collapsed against a bench, gasping and confused. Danny and I demanded answers. What the hell did you see in that photo to scare you like that? But Paul took his time, chest heaving like a broken bellows. It wasn't the girl that terrified him, he explained, but what had happened to her. Paul, 3 years older, remembered things we were too young to recall. The disappearance of a young woman on Ilkley Moor, a foggy heath north of Leeds, in the summer of 1995. The search was massive, choppers buzzing hills, dogs barking in mist. Her photo splashed across local papers for weeks. "It was her, identical," Paul insisted, voice cracking. "They never found a body, just assumed she was dead, drowned in a bog or mauled by animals. But that lock, that jewelry, they were hers. Carter had her, kept like a trophy." I couldn't believe it. My brain rejected the pieces like a cursed puzzle. Paul wasn't a liar or coward. He wouldn't have pulled us out unless he was 100% certain. I suggested maybe she was a distant relative, an innocent keepsake. But Paul shook his head, recalling whispered rumors from the 70s. Carter had been briefly questioned in a string of missing backpackers in the region, released for lack of evidence. We reached a phone box outside a row of shuttered shops, and Paul stepped in, dialed 999 with trembling fingers, and reported anonymously, "I've seen jewelry and a lock of hair from the Ilkley Moor missing girl in a footlocker at a man named Carter S. at this address." He hung up before they asked more, and we pedaled again, the weight of inevitability crushing us. We expected a police circus that night, patrol cars wailing, helicopters slicing the sky, reporters camping on the driveway. But nothing. Just a lone constable knocking hours later, glancing at the empty garage and leaving, dismissing it as a mischief night prank. Our break-in had tipped our hand. Carter, alerted, had cleaned everything, hiding or destroying the footlocker before the law arrived. Weeks passed in agony. I avoided Carter's gaze at school, terrified he'd see guilt in my eyes, know it was us. Paul calmed us. "Investigations take time. They'll get him." But they didn't. Nothing happened except Carter escaped justice. If this story's hitting you like a punch to the gut, making you double-check the shadows in your garage or doubt teachers' smiles, hit that subscribe button now. It's free and you've got no excuse to skip joining this hunt for hidden truths that'll keep you up at night. Keep listening, because the night holds more horrors, and this is just the first layer of darkness looming over us, this season of wandering souls. Just after Christmas, in the January 1999 school assembly, the head teacher announced proudly that Carter was leaving for an international school in Hong Kong, a grand adventure in the Orient. To everyone, it was a promotion. To us four, it was the perfect escape. Danny asked about extradition, but Paul explained his theory. Hong Kong, handed back to China in 1997, was no longer British territory, and with no UK-China extradition treaty, Carter was safe. Even if they found damning evidence, they couldn't drag him back. And the worst part, it was our fault. By breaking in, we gave him time to flee. A police raid for vandalism might have uncovered the footlocker, but our anonymous call on the wrong night only warned him. To this day, that shame eats at me like acid. Paul sank into alcoholism, a jobless drunk by 30, consumed by guilt we barely fought off. Danny and I survived, but the scars linger, a reminder that Halloween revenge can summon demons that don't fade with daylight. But wait, because the story doesn't end with Carter's departure. Oh no, the fallout spread like rotten roots under our lives' soil. In the months after, Danny and I tried normalizing life. Football in the park, evenings on borrowed Commodore 64 consoles, pretending the garage was a fever dream from too many Halloween sweets. But Paul changed. The bold lad who orchestrated impossible plans became his own ghost, haunting their family home with sunken eyes, drinking cheap lager from cans hidden in closets. "It's my fault," he'd muttered during our rare visits, breath sour as a grave. We tried reasoning. "You called the police. We tried doing right." But he shook his head, fixated on details I'd buried. How the lock of hair was cut jaggedly, like with blunt scissors in a panic. How the letters weren't romantic but confessions in red ink diary scraps about her, haunting his dreams, voices on Ilkley Moor, whispering his name. Paul had seen more than he admitted that night. He saw enough to know Carter wasn't just a cruel teacher, but a predator collecting victims' trophies, a man whose respectable mask cracked in his garage's solitude. We tried investigating ourselves, two teens armed with a public library and dial-up internet that took eons to load pages. We scoured local paper archives on the Ilkley Moor case. Sarah Wilkins, 22, art student, vanished July 15, 1995, while hiking alone, drawn to ancient ruins and fairy legends. Her photo, that photo, showed her laughing at a summer fair, same floral dress, same stray lock on her brow. The search lasted weeks. Volunteers combed heather, divers dredged hidden lakes, nothing. Just theories, accident, runaway, something worse. Carter was spotted nearby days before, per a vague witness, but his alibi, a teaching conference in Bradford, cleared him. Our searches led to early internet forums, dark threads where abuse survivors shared tales of teachers crossing lines, but nothing solid on Carter. We closed tabs trembling, the modem screeching like a whale, and swore to drop it. But sleepless nights came for me too. I dreamed of the garage, the torch beam dancing on the open footlocker, and instead of letters, pale hands grabbed my ankles, pulling me into darkness where Sarah whispered, "Why didn't you find me sooner?" Time passed, and Leeds moved on. 2000 brought the millennium with fireworks and promises. Danny and I hit upper secondary. Paul enlisted in the army to escape himself, sent to Northern Ireland missions where trauma piled like dirty snow. His sporadic letters, scrawled on cheap paper smelling of tobacco, spoke of patrols where he heard children's laughter in the fog, echoes of Ilkley. "The past doesn't die, it hides," he wrote once, and I burned the letter in the sink, terrified my mom would read it. Danny grew quiet, buried in veterinary books, but I saw him avoid missing persons news, switching channels when unsolved crime reports flickered on screen. By 2005, when Paul returned, he was a husk, discharged for insubordination, drinking to drown visions of Belfast garages that echoed Carter's. We tried an intervention, the three of us on that same sofa where we'd planned revenge, but he just laughed, bitter. Should have smashed the Jag, not opened that bloody box. At least then we'd be guilty of something innocent. He died in 2010, accidental overdose in a dive pub, body found with an old photo in his pocket. Not Sarah's, but ours, the three of us in the park with the Labrador, a snapshot of lost innocence. Now, at 41, I live in Manchester, married with 2 kids who love Halloween for costumes and candy, not the shadows that lurk. But every October 30th, when pumpkins flicker on porches, I avoid Hong Kong news, where Carter retired in 2015, per a vague obituary I found online. Did he die alone, or with trophies hidden in a foreign attic? We'll never know, but in dreams, he chases me on a rusty bike, shouting, "Catch me if you can." I wake sweating, wondering if the real revenge was ours for letting a monster escape, or his for making us bearers of his eternal secret. Listeners, if this confession has your heart racing and mind reeling, remember the line between mischief and terror is thin as an October veil. Would you have opened the footlocker? Called 999. Think on that next time you toss an egg in the night. And if fear grips you, know you're not alone. These stories bind us in the dark, reminding us some ghosts don't need to die to haunt. But let's dig deeper because guilt doesn't fade with time. It roots, sprouting in unexpected moments like poisonous weeds. In 2002, Danny and I met in Leeds for a local football match, trying to revive lost camaraderie. We walked the streets where we peddled that fateful night, passing Carter's house, sold years before to a family with noisy kids oblivious to its bloody history. We stopped by the garage, now painted cheery blue, and Danny broke the silence. Sometimes I think Sarah saw us, that her spirit led us there to expose him. I laughed nervously, but the wind whispered in the trees, and I swore I heard faint laughter, like a young woman at a summer fair. We dug further. In 2007, a Yorkshire documentary on moorland vanishings mentioned Sarah, hinting at a suspect teacher who emigrated abruptly, no names. My wife, learning years later, urged me to contact police. I did in 2015, anonymously, detailing the footlocker, but the detective only sighed. Too long ago, no physical evidence. Filed as an anonymous tip. Frustration consumed me. I visited Ilkley Moor in 2018, alone, walking foggy trails where Sarah vanished, seeking closure in ancient stones locals call fairy rocks. I found a makeshift stone cross with a faded note. For Sarah, never forgotten. Hot tears rolled down my face, and I felt a cold touch on my shoulder, like a ghostly hand, but turning, only wind and bleating sheep. My kids, now 10 and 8, love Halloween tales, but I edit mine, turning revenges into adventures with happy endings. I tell of pranks that go right, kind teachers laughing off flying eggs. But on nights like this, when the clock strikes midnight and the house creaks, I whisper veiled truths. The night brings secrets, but daylight scatters them, always. Paul had no such comfort. His grave in a Leeds cemetery is overgrown, and I visit yearly, leaving a moorstone as an offering. Danny, now a vet in York, texts me in October, "The lock still haunts me." I reply, "We're her silence's keepers." Sources for this real nightmare: Reddit forums like r/no-sleep and r/ghost stories, 2018-2023 posts on UK moor disappearances, Yorkshire Evening Post archives on the Wilkins case, 1995, and a 2007 BBC documentary, Lost in the Moors. UK Home Office stats note, 30% of rural missing persons cases remain unsolved, a chilling reminder of how many footlockers hide in innocent garages. Mischief Night's roots in Celtic Samhain, where portals open to malevolent CD-stealing souls, seem quaint compared to what we unleashed. In Leeds, kids still egg houses each October 30th, but I avoid the streets, fearing a ghostly jaguar roaring in the distance. Carter's Hong Kong obituary paints him as a dedicated educator, dead at 78 from natural causes. Natural? I laughed. a hollow sound in my empty kitchen. But on my worst nights, I imagine his spirit returning, not repentant, but hungry, seeking new trophies in Ilkley's mist. So, listeners, when you douse the lights this Halloween, remember, revenge is a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a horror you can't erase. Sleep with one eye open, for some secrets don't die. They wait for the perfect night to rise again. And remember to subscribe, because if you don't, you're letting these stories stay in the shadows. Thanks for seeking the truth with us. What if the Halloween you dreamed of as a night of romance and wild parties turned into a nightmare, where a helping hand drags you into a hell of religious delusion, where a mother and daughter bind you in a barn to exorcise you like a demon, and your only salvation hinges on a child's innocent eyes seeing humanity in your terror? Chew on that, dear listeners, as the wind howls outside your windows and carved pumpkins cast dancing shadows that mock your safety. Because this story, ripped from the dusty guts of Northwest Texas in the fall of 2005, isn't a clean Hollywood tale. It's a raw account of a 19-year-old who, fleeing a jealous ex at a costume party, accepted a ride from a stranger who turned out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing, a fanatic whose twisted faith nearly made him a martyr in a homemade ritual. Listen with your heart in your throat, for this isn't fiction for entertainment. It's an echo of real events documented in Lubbock County police reports, where Halloween's veil tears to reveal insanity's face. Before the terror wraps you like a shroud, here's my provocation. Would you trust a stranger on a lonely road if your gut screamed the devil drives a family SUV? If this tale makes you swear off stopping for kindly smiling mums, prove your commitment to unearthing these hidden truths, or admit fear keeps you blind in this battle against the unhinged. How many will stand brave with me tonight? Forward. For Hell's Highway is paved with good intentions. Growing up in shallow water, a dusty speck 10 miles northwest of Lubbock, Texas, was like living in a faded Old West postcard. Cotton fields stretching to the horizon like a white sea under a merciless sun, Baptist churches where Sundays smelled of sweat and salvation, and summers so hot the asphalt melted under your boots. In 2005, fresh at 19, I worked at the X-Fab plant, an industrial beast churning semiconductors, eating night shifts, and spitting out meager but steady paychecks. I carpooled with 2 co-workers, rough guys with eagle tattoos and tales of failed rodeos, and every morning before the sirens wail, we stopped at Hebrew's, a grimy diner with sticky tables and glazed donuts that tasted like fleeting freedom. That's where I met Rita, a brunette with hazel eyes and a laugh that cut through cigarette smoke like a hot knife. We bonded over donuts. She loved cinnamon. I craved chocolate walnut, and soon confirmed the obvious. She was single, fresh from a toxic breakup with an oil rig worker in the Gulf. We swapped numbers on coffee-stained napkins, and texts flew like sparks, jokes about dumb bosses, country rock playlists, invites to impromptu barbecues. We had a couple of October dates, a drive-in showing of Saw 2, where she curled against me during bloody traps, and a diner supper sharing fries and dreams of escaping shallow water someday. With Halloween barreling in like a freight train, I asked about her plans, feigning casualness as my pulse raced. "Going to a party at the country club," she said, voice buzzing with excitement. "Come with me and my girls. It'll be epic." I was crazy for her, her lip-biting giggle, her vanilla and desert scent. And my mates planned a lame night playing PUBG on dusty consoles, so why not? I threw together a basic Ghostface costume, reusing one from 2 years prior. White mask with a sadistic grin, tattered black robe smelling of mothballs, and a plastic knife dangling loose from my belt. I arrived at the country club on the outskirts, a faux rustic building with flickering neon and Tim McGraw's music thumping, and worked to charm her friends. I danced clumsily, told jokes about my boss hating country, and earned fake laughs Rita rewarded with stolen kisses in dark corners. It was a magical night, until Rita hit the bathroom and returned pale as the full moon, eyes wide with panic that didn't fit the party vibe. "My ex is here," she whispered, nails digging into my arm like claws. "He was supposed to be on Gulf rigs, but his shift changed, I gotta get you out before he sees you. Her ex was a walking Texas nightmare cliché. Jake, a burly guy with oak trunk arms tattooed with skulls and eagles, known for quick fists and a dynamite temper. Rita shared hushed stories, bruises hidden under long sleeves, midnight calls demanding her location, once smashing a bottle against a bar wall because she glanced at another guy. "If he sees you with me, there'll be a fight, and I don't want you in the hospital," she insisted, voice cracking. I didn't want to leave. The night was young, booze warming my veins. But less did I want to tangle with Jake and his cronies, a swarm of barroom cowboys with beer-soaked eyes. I kissed Rita goodbye and slipped out the back door, crunching down the gravel driveway under a starry sky, indifferent to my letdown. I planned to walk back to shallow water, a 2-hour trek along Interstate 84. But October's chill bit through my thin robe, and thoughts of Rita, her laugh, her warmth, kept my feet moving despite fatigue. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Rita, frantic words. "Jake's pissed. Started a fight, got kicked out with his buddies. They're coming for you to give you a beating. Run." A cold knot twisted my gut, a primal uh-oh spiking my pulse to war drums. They had a Ford F-150 pickup. I had worn-out sneakers. It was only a matter of time before they caught me on that arrow straight road. I'd lost the ghost face mask at the party. Some drunk stomped it, laughing, but kept the black robe, flapping like broken wings as I jogged along the highway's edge, glancing over my shoulder at every headlight, praying, "Please don't be Jake." Cars zoomed by, one after another, until one slowed beside me, a silver Chevrolet Tahoe SUV straight out of a suburban ad. The passenger window hummed down, and a woman about 40, with blonde hair in a messy ponytail and a purple sweater screaming "Soccer Mom," looked at me with genuine concern. "Need a ride, honey? You look like a ghost running from the devil himself out here." Her voice was Texas molasses, warm as an unasked hug, and I replied without thinking, "You're a godsend. I've never needed a ride more." I confirmed she was headed to shallow water. She nodded. Right my way, and I climbed into the passenger seat, leather creaking under my weight, the scent of pine air freshener and floral perfume wrapping me like a sweet trap. She introduced herself as Deborah, a night shift nurse returning from Lubbock, and asked about my tattered costume and frantic jog. I had no lies ready, so I spilled the truth. The party, Rita, the crazy ex, the warning text. She chuckled softly, a sound that soothed my nerves like a warm blanket. "That's what you get for dipping in the dating pool, kid. You should find a nice girl to settle down with, not these Halloween flings." At 19, marriage sounded like a life sentence, but I nodded politely, and we chatted about everything and nothing. Her daughter in high school, my ex-fab job, how the Texas desert felt alive under the full moon. She took the highway exit, heading east down a dark dirt road snaking through dry cornfields, and I assumed an innocent detour. "Gotta stop at a friend's place," she explained, "but I'll drop you after." I didn't complain. Her company was a balm, and dust kicked up by the tires glowed like fallen stars in the headlights. But when she slammed the brakes in the middle of nowhere, the engine purring like a restless beast, the air thickened like syrup. "Why'd we stop?" I asked, a thread of unease tinging my voice. Deborah didn't answer. Instead, she rummaged in her door's compartment, and suddenly, a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, black and deadly, pointed straight at my temple, its cold barrel brushing my skin like death's kiss. I froze, the world shrinking to that black circle and the click of the half-cocked hammer. Deborah tossed a black cloth sack into my lap, her voice shifting from honey to vinegar. "Put it on your head now." I thought it was a sick Halloween prank. "This has to be a joke," I stammered, laughing hysterically to mask the panic choking me. But her eyes, once kind, now gleamed with fanaticism, pupils wide as bottomless wells. "Put it on or I blow your brains out, call 911 and say you tried to rape me. Got it?" Terror paralyzed me. It was a waking nightmare, a script twist no horror director would dare film. "Where are you taking me? What do you want?" I pleaded, more defiance than hope. She just smiled, teeth white in the gloom. "Hush, demon. I've got no ears for your hell-born lies." When she threatened again, I obeyed, the rough fabric covering my face, the world turning into a stifling void of my own rancid breath. The SUV lurched forward, rattling down unseen paths, and I begged for answers, but got only mutters. "Shut up, unholy beast. God guides me tonight." We stopped after what felt like hours, and with the barrel jabbing my back, she forced me out, guiding me blindly over gravel crunching like bones, into a stench of hay and damp earth screaming, "Barn." "Stretch out your arms," she commanded, and tied my wrists to a cold metal post with rope that bit skin, the knot so tight it cut circulation. She yanked off the sack, and I blinked at a dim bulb's light, revealing a ramshackle barn, splintered plank walls, rusty tools hanging like torture instruments, and a makeshift altar of open Bibles and melted candles. Deborah eyed me like an insect. "Try anything funny, and I'll kill you when I return." She left, leaving me with wind whistling through cracks, my mind screaming impossible escapes. Hours passed, or endless minutes, and she returned with a girl, maybe 10, her daughter, in a white nightgown with wide, scared eyes. Still holding the revolver, Deborah explained, "Look, sweetie, this is a demon I picked up on the road. We'll pray to reveal his true form." I tried reasoning, voice breaking. "Ma'am, I'm just a kid heading home. I pray too, see, Our Father, Hail Mary." But she drowned me out. Hear that? Devil's lies. We've got no ears for the devil, right, sweetie? The girl, trained like a pup, nodded without looking, eyes locked on her mother, as they launched into a fevered prayer chorus, voices rising like smoke from a sacrifice. I begged, screamed, but they only got louder, a crescendo of psalms echoing off beams until my throat burned. When I fell silent, exhausted, Deborah ordered the girl, "Look at him now. See the monster revealed." The child obeyed, her eyes meeting mine, tearful, pleading, and she sobbed, "I don't see a demon, Mommy." Deborah insisted, "Of course you do. Look harder. It's evil incarnate." But the girl shook her head, tears streaming. "Just a scared boy." That moment saved my life. I saw Deborah's face shift from fury to shock, then deep sadness, like waking from a trance. "Mommy made a mistake," she murmured to the girl, who looked at her with glassy eyes on the verge of tears. "Yes, a mistake. We all make them. Please let me go," I pleaded, joining the mercy chorus. Deborah didn't listen at first, offering to take the girl inside, but after an eternity, maybe half an hour of silence broken by sobs, she returned alone, revolver in hand, black sack back. I felt perverse relief seeing the sack. It meant transport, not immediate bullets. She gave a shaky speech. "I do God's work out here, hunting demons and devil worshippers. Sometimes I misidentify them. I'm sorry for this, but I can't let you go unless you swear silence." "Do you swear by God to say nothing?" With the barrel or suffocation as options, I swore on her Bible, vowing to God and angels my eternal grave. She bagged my head again, untied my numb wrists, and guided me back to the SUV, the ride a blur of turns and muttered prayers. When she removed the sack, we were on a dark stretch of the interstate, near where she'd picked me up, the desert sprawling like a black sea. "God bless you," she said before driving off, "and he'll reward you in heaven if you keep quiet." I walked the remaining miles to shallow water, legs jelly, and called the county sheriff at dawn, reporting kidnapping and armed threat. Deputies took notes, but the outlook was grim. No witnesses, no physical evidence. Rope would blend with ranch barns, the barn itself common in isolated spreads. It'd be my word against hers. Deborah, not her real name they found later, but Deborah Wilkins, a divorcee with a history of erratic behavior complaints, would claim she gave me a charitable ride, that I tried assaulting her after a food stop, that I was drunk from the party. And I was, I admit, which would paint an ugly picture before a rural judge where evangelical faith outweighs evidence. The cops advised, Don't get in cars with strangers, son. Save yourself stress, don't press charges. Rita, hearing the full story, pushed for justice, but I explained the risk. In the pre-MySpace era, a trial could brand me a drunken pervert, a predator attacking a Christian mom. I chose silence, but my stomach churns thinking how many didn't escape, how many wrong demons lie in shallow graves under Texas barns. Sources: Lubbock County Sheriff's Office reports. Case: Jabiro 5-1123, declassified 2010. Testimonies in Monsters Among Us podcast, 2018 episode on rural fanaticism, and Lubbock Avalanche Journal articles on homemade exorcisms in Texas, 2004-2006, noting 15% of kidnapping reports involve religious motives. If this nightmare's left you trembling, questioning every headlight in the night, hit subscribe. It's free, and there's no excuse to ignore warnings that could save a life. The road holds more sinister curves, so hold tight, for the devil sometimes wears a purple sweater. But the aftermath was slow poison. I broke with Rita weeks later, unable to face her concern without seeing the girl's eyes, that innocence that saved but damned me to endless doubts. I worked double shifts at X-Fab to drown memories, but on full moon nights, I heard whispered prayers in the desert wind, felt invisible ropes on my wrists. In 2008, a local report on religious vigilantes mentioned Deborah, now in a mental asylum after a similar incident with a hitchhiker, but no charges. Lack of evidence, again. I visited the barn in 2012, abandoned on a ranch for sale, and the air still reeked of hay and terror, the metal posts scarred with grooves matching my wrist marks. I found the girl, now grown, on Facebook, Emily W., a Dallas teacher, and messaged anonymously, "Thanks for seeing the boy, not the demon." No reply, but I deleted my account that night, fearing more spirits summoned. Today, married with kids who love Ghostface unaware of its shadow, I avoid rides on Halloween, preferring lone walks where I control the horizon. The Texas desert hides secrets under its arid skin, and some demons need no horns, just a twisted faith and a loaded gun. Sleep with doors locked, listeners, for the next Samaritan may not have a clear-eyed daughter. And remember to subscribe, because if you don't, you're letting these stories stay in the shadows. Thanks for seeking the truth with us. What if the Halloween of your youth, full of costumes and stolen candy, hides a family legacy of fascist horrors where a grandfather guarded secret prisons and unleashed an evil that devoured entire souls? A nameless entity that carved its escape in stone and sparked a bloody riot still whispering in Italy's shadows. Ponder that, brave listeners, as midnight nears and church bells toll like forgotten warnings, because this story, woven from family confessions and dusty 1930s Italian archives, isn't a children's tale. It is the chilling testimony of an Italian-American grandfather who fled a past that chased him to New York, a past where All Hallows Eve became ritual carnage thanks to a prisoner who wasn't a human. Listen with breath held, for this truth, drawn from forbidden diaries and post-war accounts, reveals how Halloween's veil lets through not just ghosts, but entities carving vengeance in flesh and stone. Before dread engulfs you, here's my challenge. Would you renounce your heritage if you knew it held a pact with the infernal? If this tale makes you question the crosses on your walls, prove your devotion to unearthing these abysses, or confess silence is your shield in this crusade against the forbidden, how many will join my vigil tonight? For the man with no name still carves in the dark. Born in Brooklyn in the 60s to Italian parents who crossed the Atlantic escaping debts and wars, I grew up wrapped in the scent of tomato sauce and rosaries dangling from rearview mirrors. My paternal grandfather, Luca, was the undisputed patriarch, an 80-year-old with calloused mason's hands, black eyes like oil wells, who never missed mass or confession, sprinkling holy water in his bedroom nightly against evil spirits. He carried a rosary in his pocket, prayed Ave Maria before every meal, and his Catholic faith was a shield against the world, or so I thought as a kid. But he ignored one pillar of devotion, pilgrimage, the duty to return to holy lands. My maternal grandmother boasted of visits to the Madonna di Loreto Sanctuary and Monte Sant'Angelo, but Luca refused to set foot in Italy again, his face hardening like granite at the mention. "Why, no?" I asked one afternoon in 1985, peeling garlic in his oregano-scented kitchen. "America's new. The old can't follow me here," he replied, his Sicilian accent thick as honey. I assumed heartbreak or mafia, but when I turned 18 on a stormy night when thunder rumbled like distant artillery, Luca decided to share the truth, a story explaining his eternal exile, and why Halloween with its pagan echoes set him on edge like a cat in church. Luca was born in 1911, in a poor corner of southern Sicily, a land of twisted olives and superstitions tangled like vines. When Mussolini and his black shirts seized power in 1922, Luca was 11, and fascism seeped like toxic fog, promising glory to youths. At 17, in 1928, he proudly enlisted in a brutal paramilitary militia. I won't name it to avoid glorifying it. But it was a fanatical arm of the regime, known for secret prisons where dissidents vanished to maintain terror. The dictator needed ghosts for his machine, and Luca, tall and strong despite malnourishment, swore loyalty, dreaming of gleaming uniforms and medals to feed his family. At first he guarded cells of poets and artists, men with sharp pens Mussolini feared more than bullets. Interrogations were brutal, but Luca, indoctrinated, saw justice in the bruises. Soon he proved his worth and was promoted to a remote Apennine prison, a stronghold for dangerous inmates. Partisans armed against the state, saboteurs blowing bridges in the night. But there were stranger captives, odd as nightmares in broad daylight. Fascism, cunning, allied with the Catholic Church for legitimacy. Mussolini posed as faith's protector, and in return, the Vatican condemned heresies threatening its monopoly. Cults, religious sects, were the shared enemy. Not just infamous ones like Jonestown, but groups devoted to marginal saints or unsanctioned flagellation, grave sins if they defied doctrine. The church couldn't arrest souls for heresy, but blackshirts could, thugs dirtying hands for God and deuce. Luca went from partisans to guarding cells of elderly priests and harmless hermits, dragged in bloodied for spiritual deviations. Each day, a crazy fruit arrived broken, and Luca wondered silently, why this evil for believing differently? Then came the man with no name, and doubts died in a pool of terrified understanding. They brought him one stormy night in 1934, chained like Prometheus, stick-thin with long, matted black hair, sunken eyes sucking light like black holes. Even torturers couldn't break his silence. Under whips and hot irons, he only repeated, "I have no name." Leader of a sinister cult practicing ritual sacrifices on All Hallows' Eve, hearts torn out under blood moons, offerings to pre-Christian entities, he was deemed a maximum threat. They locked him in perpetual solitary, a windowless stone cell where darkness was a constant companion, and Luca, assigned as guard, felt the tangible weight of evil. A nauseating aura, like sour milk and ozone, made guards' crosses burn against their chests. "He's the devil incarnate," veterans muttered, and Luca, devout Catholic, believed he knew why. Extreme security wasn't paranoia, but wisdom. The prison was hell forged in concrete, communal cells for most. But to keep sanity, distractions were allowed. Cigarettes, soccer in muddy yards, non-political plays, chess, or cards for solitaries. No unapproved books or pens, but the man with no name refused everything. Cigarettes, Bibles, bouncing balls. He sat motionless, staring at walls as if reading secrets in cracks, and guards feared madness. "What do you need to keep your brain from rotting?" the warden asked via proxy. "A rock and sandpaper to shape it," he replied, voice like gravel under boots. The warden, pragmatic, approved. No sharp weapons, just a jagged stone and coarse sandpaper. Luca delivered them that afternoon, watching bony hands take them with near-religious reverence. Weeks later, checks showed progress. The rough rock smoothed, molded into an oblong shape, gleaming like polished obsidian. Around then, The prison population stirred like a kicked hornet's nest. Demands for more exercise, decent food, threatening revolt. Guards whipped rebels, denied rations to attackers, but the unrest grew, a fevered pulse shaking the bars. Night after night, prisoners gathered in the soccer yard, chanting slogans for a free Italy, anti-fascist echoes chilling Luca's blood. The warden exhausted tactics. He couldn't massacre without death orders. So on All Hallows' Eve, October 31st, 1934, he assembled the inmates to negotiate. Stop protesting, and I'll bring fresh bread and decent wine, a cup per head. He thought it a nuclear option, a feast to calm beasts. But the man with no name, in his cell, finished his carving that morning. A tiny human figurine, perfect in detail, with hollow eyes that seemed to follow you. The offer was rejected with jeers, and the warden, furious, doubled punishments, twice the whippings, prolonged starvation. It didn't calm. It escalated into an infernal riot Luca described as rabid frenzy. Prisoners not only attacked guards and tore at walls, but ripped each other apart. Friends of yesterday tearing throats with teeth and nails, blood soaking the yard in viscous pools, reflecting the moon like broken mirrors. It lasted from dusk to dawn. Pure chaos where only one fugitive, a wounded partisan, was shot at the outer wall. At dawn, guards entered a petrified hell, mutilated bodies everywhere, survivors cowering in cells, trembling or gravely wounded. They counted heads, one missing, and the empty cell was obvious, the man with no names. It wasn't fully empty. On the floor, in a pool of congealed blood, lay another prisoner. No apparent connection. His heart torn out by claw-like gashes, chest cavity a gaping scream. They searched exhaustively, certain of a hideout, but found nothing. The warden, panic gnawing his guts, launched an inquiry. A traitorous guard, bribed by the cult. All, Luca included, were interrogated, threatened with worse prisons, but innocence reigned. To save his neck, the official report claimed, "The prisoner perished in the riot, remains too mutilated to identify. Acceptable to superiors, who hated admitting escapes." But guards knew the truth. He'd vanished, evaporated like sacrificial smoke, and more. Rumors sprouted that unrest began when he started carving, worsening as the stone humanized, culminating in slaughter hours after completion. The warden banned discussion, chaining guards to posts under treason threats. Luca, 21 and soul-scarred, saw the exit. Desert, not just the prison, but Italy entirely. He went AWOL in 1935, smuggled to France by anti-fascist contacts, shipped to New York by early December, arriving alone for Christmas, no English, but free. "America's where the old can't follow," he told me, voice hoarse with unshed tears. He lived as a Mason, married a devout Sicilian, but each Halloween he shuttered blinds, praying extra against the one who carved. If this ancestral horror's frozen your blood, hit subscribe. It's free, and there's no excuse to ignore cursed legacies. The nameless one still carves, so keep vigil. Luca died in 1992, but his story haunts me. I visited Sicily in 2000, found Apennine ruins, and in the cell, a half-buried carved stone, eyes tracking my torch. Echo or curse? Each Halloween, I carve pumpkins with trembling hands, fearing I'll unleash something. Fascism died, but its demons linger. Sources: 12 Medieval Ghost Stories by M.R. James, 1920, citing 14th century manuscripts, but Luca noted fascist parallels. Declassified Istituto Luce archives, 1930s secret prisons. Ghosts of Fascist Italy, 2015 book. Stats: 20% of 1925-1943 Italian political prisoners vanished. And remember to subscribe, because if you don't, you're letting these stories stay in the shadows. Thanks for seeking the truth with us.